Welcome to Historian Diary. Today I will tell you a story about Babylon. But this is not a story about Hammurabi's Code or the Hanging Gardens. This is a story about religion and sex intertwined, about women who practiced prostitution in temples, about girls forced to sell their bodies to strangers in service to a goddess, about a practice presented as sacred duty, but actually a system of control. This is the story of the sacred prostitutes of Babylon, a practice that lasted from 2000 BC to the 5th century BC. In the greatest temples of Mesopotamia, thousands of women sold their sexuality in the name of the goddess. And from Herodotus' observations we know, every Babylonian woman was required to perform this ritual at least once in her lifetime. My hand is trembling as I read these ancient texts. Herodotus' Histories, Book 1, Chapter 199, written in the 5th century BC by a historian who saw Babylon with his own eyes, describing in detail the practice he witnessed in Babylonian temples. Clay tablets, Sumerian and Akkadian inscriptions, temple records, all confirming the same thing. Sacred prostitution in Babylon was real. It operated as an official institution. Under the guise of serving the goddess, women sold their bodies to strangers. This is documented. This happened. And it lasted for over 2,000 years. Comment below where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to tell you comes from ancient sources, archaeological findings, and historian testimonies. Let me start at the beginning. Mesopotamia, from 4000 BC onward, was home to the world's most advanced civilization. Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians. All these civilizations shared a common belief. Goddesses were powerful, and the most powerful goddess was Inanna, called Inanna by the Sumerians, Ishtar in Akkad and Babylon, goddess of love, goddess of sexuality, goddess of war, goddess of fertility. The most complex and powerful goddess in the Mesopotamian pantheon, Ishtar's mythology was filled with violence and sexuality. In myth, Ishtar was the goddess who sent her husband Dumuzi to the underworld. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, she was the goddess who proposed marriage to the hero, but raged when rejected. Ishtar was fierce, passionate, unpredictable. And in Babylon, there was a special way to serve this goddess, sacred prostitution. Please like this video, because what I'm about to describe is ancient. Mesopotamia's most controversial practice, sacred prostitution, Greek term hierodulia, was a widespread practice in Mesopotamia. In Ishtar's temples, there was a special class of women. In Akkadian, they were called qadištu, meaning holy woman. In Sumerian, Nu Gig, these women lived in the temple, and their duty was to serve the goddess by having sexual intercourse with men who came to the temple. But this wasn't ordinary prostitution. This was a religious ritual. The system worked. Like this, Ishtar temples were Babylon's most magnificent structures. Massive ziggurats, gold-plated walls, colorful glazed tile decorations. The Ezagila Temple, Babylon's main temple, stood at the city's center, 7 stories high, visible from miles away. Inside, there were chambers, special rooms where the Kadeshu women waited, and men would come, Babylonians, foreigners, merchants, soldiers, anyone, would pay. Silver, gold, grain, animals. Payment went to the temple, and in return, they would have sex with the temple women in the name of Ishtar as a sacred act. Subscribe to Historian Diary if you haven't already, because this gets more disturbing. Herodotus, the Greek historian, visited Babylon around 450 BC, and he wrote this in his Histories. The most shameful custom among the Babylonians is the following. Every woman born in the country must once in her life go to the temple of Aphrodite. He used the Greek name for Ishtar, and there submit herself to a stranger. Many of the wealthier women who are too proud to mix with the rest, drive in, covered carriages to the temple, and take their station there with a large number of attendants. But the majority sit in the sacred enclosure with a crown of cord around their heads. There is always a great crowd, some coming and others going. Passages marked off by ropes run in all directions among the women, and strangers pass along them to make their choice. When a woman has once seated herself, she must not return home until a stranger has thrown a silver coin into her lap and taken her outside to lie with her. As he throws the coin, he says, "I invoke the goddess Melita," which is their name for Aphrodite. The silver coin may be of any size. She cannot refuse it, for that is forbidden by the law, since once thrown, it becomes sacred. She must follow the first man who throws, and can reject no one. When she has lain with him, having thus satisfied, the goddess she returns home, and from that time forth, no gift, however great, will prevail with her. The tall and beautiful women soon manage to get home again, but the ugly ones stay a long time before they can fulfill the law. Some have waited 3 or 4 years in the temple. Let me repeat that. According to Herodotus, every woman in Babylon, rich or poor, noble or commoner, beautiful or ugly, had to perform this ritual once in her lifetime. Go to Ishtar's temple, sit with a rope crown on her head, wait for a stranger, accept whatever coin he threw, have sex with him. Only then could she return home. Only then was her religious duty fulfilled. Herodotus called this the most shameful custom. But in Babylon, this was sacred law, religious obligation. And women had no choice. Comment below. Was this religion? Or exploitation disguised as religion? Now, modern historians debate Herodotus' account. Some argue he exaggerated, that he misunderstood what he saw, that this universal requirement didn't exist. But here's what we know from other sources. Sacred prostitution definitely existed in Mesopotamian temples. The term qadištu appears in hundreds of texts. Temple archives record payments to these women. Sumerian hymns describe temple prostitutes serving Inanna. The Code of Hammurabi, Babylon's famous law code from 1750 BC, mentions temple prostitutes multiple times. They had legal status. They could own property. They were protected under law. This was an official institution, but was it universal? Did every woman have to do this? That part is debated. Some historians think Herodotus witnessed the qadištu, the professional temple prostitutes, and assumed all women did this. Others argue there were two systems: professional temple prostitutes who did this permanently, and ordinary women who had to perform it once as a coming-of-age ritual. Either way, the practice existed. Temple prostitution was real, and thousands of women were involved. Let me describe what life was like for the qadištu. These weren't street prostitutes. They were temple servants. Many came from poor families who couldn't afford dowries. Parents would dedicate their daughters to the temple, sometimes as young as 10 or 12 years old. The girl would enter Ishtar's service. She would be trained, taught music, dancing, religious rituals, cosmetics, perfumes, how to please men, because pleasing men was pleasing the goddess. The qadištu wore distinctive clothing, special colored robes, jewelry, heavy makeup. They shaved their heads or wore elaborate wigs. They were recognizable. Everyone knew what they were. And in Babylonian society, they occupied a strange position. They were respected as servants of Ishtar, but they were also stigmatized. They couldn't marry. They couldn't have legitimate children. They lived outside normal society, in the temple, forever. If you've watched this far, thank you. Comment below. Were these women victims or empowered priestesses? Here's where it gets complicated. Some modern scholars, especially in the 1970s and 80s, argued that sacred prostitution was empowering, that these women had economic independence, that they controlled their own sexuality in a patriarchal society, that serving Ishtar gave them power and status. They point to evidence. Kadeshu could own property. They could conduct business. Some became wealthy. They weren't owned by husbands or fathers. They answered only to the goddess. But let's be honest about what this really was. These were women, often girls, dedicated to temples by their families. They had no choice. They couldn't leave. They spent their lives having sex with strangers for money that went to the temple, not to them. They were forbidden from normal family life, from marriage, from children. They were separated from society. And when they grew old, when they were no longer desirable, what happened to them? The texts don't say. They just disappear from the records. This wasn't empowerment. This was institutionalized sexual exploitation dressed up as religion. The temple controlled these women's bodies. The priests controlled these women's labor. And the goddess Ishtar was used to justify it all. This is sacred. This pleases the goddess. You are serving the divine. But in reality, this was a system that benefited the temple economically and gave men sanctioned access to women's bodies. The Babylonian temples were rich, incredibly rich. They controlled vast estates, employed thousands, owned farmland, workshops, businesses, and sacred prostitution was profitable. Men paid to have sex with the qadištu. Merchants traveling through Babylon would visit the temples. Soldiers, foreigners, everyone. The silver, gold, and goods flowed into the temple treasuries. The priests grew wealthy. The temples grew powerful. And the women? They were the product being sold. Subscribe to Historian. Diary for more investigations into history's dark religious practices. Write in comments. What other controversial ancient rituals should I cover? But the practice wasn't just in Babylon. It spread across the ancient Near East. Phoenician cities had sacred prostitutes in temples of Astarte, their version of Ishtar. In Corinth, Greece, the temple of Aphrodite employed over 1,000 sacred prostitutes, according to ancient sources. In Cyprus, in Syria, in Anatolia, wherever goddess worship thrived, sacred prostitution followed. This wasn't unique to Mesopotamia. This was a widespread ancient practice, and it lasted for millennia. From the Sumerian period, 3000 BC, through the Babylonian Empire, 1800 BC, into the Neo-Babylonian period to 600 BC, and even persisted. After Babylon fell to Persia in 539 BC, only when Christianity spread through the region around 300-400. Did the practice finally end? That's over 3,000 years. 3,000 years of women serving in temples as sacred prostitutes. Why did it last so long? Because it served multiple purposes. Religious. It honored Ishtar, goddess of love and sex. Economic. It enriched the temples. Social. It provided an outlet for male sexuality outside marriage. Political. It gave temples and priests control over women's bodies. This was a system that benefited everyone in power. Priests, merchants, men, everyone except the women themselves. The texts reveal more disturbing details. Sumerian temple hymns describe the qadištu in explicitly sexual terms. One hymn about Inanna's temple in Uruk describes the prostitutes who make the phallus sacred and prepare the bed for the goddess. Another text describes temple women as courtesans of the gods who know the art of lovemaking. These weren't metaphors. These were literal descriptions of their duties. Some qadištu held higher ranks. The Entu priestesses, high priestesses of Ishtar, were usually daughters of kings or nobles. They performed sacred marriage rituals. Once a year, on New Year's Day, the unto priestess would perform hieros gamos, sacred marriage, with either the king or the high priest, representing the goddess Ishtar, mating with her divine consort. This ritual was believed to ensure fertility for the land, abundant crops, successful births, prosperity. But essentially, this was institutionalized ritual rape dressed as religious ceremony that lower-ranking qadištu had it worse. They serviced common men, day after day, year after year. Temple records from Uruk, another major Mesopotamian city, list payments to qadištu by name. Amounts paid, services rendered. It's all documented, like business accounts, because that's what it was. A business, sexual commerce, run by temples, sanctioned by religion. Thank you for watching Historian Diary. This is history. Uncomfortable history. The kind that reveals how religion has been used to control and exploit. How sacred language can mask abuse. How institutions justify oppression by claiming divine approval. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing. Some scholars argue that sacred prostitution, as described by Herodotus, never existed. That it's a Greek misunderstanding of Babylonian religion. That Herodotus saw temple priestesses performing rituals and assumed they were prostitutes. That the qadištu weren't prostitutes at all, but respected religious officials. This theory gained traction in the 1990s and 2000s. Scholars like Stephanie Boudin argued that ancient sources about sacred prostitution were unreliable, biased, or misinterpreted, but the evidence is too strong to dismiss entirely. Yes, Herodotus may have exaggerated. Yes, Greek and Roman writers had biases against Eastern practices. But Mesopotamian sources, written by Babylonians themselves, describe the qadištu's sexual duties. Temple records show payments for sexual services. Legal codes regulate temple prostitutes. Hymns celebrate Ishtar's sexual priestesses. This wasn't just Greek prejudice. This was Babylonian reality. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Sacred prostitution existed, but it wasn't universal for all women, as Herodotus claimed. Professional qadištu served in temples permanently. Some ordinary women may have performed once as a fertility ritual. The system was complex. Some women may have chosen this life, limited as those choices were in ancient society. Others were forced, sold by families, dedicated as children. The system encompassed both willing participation and coercion. What we're left with is one of history's most controversial practices. A system that lasted 3,000 years. That involved thousands of women. That generated enormous wealth for temples. That was justified as sacred service to a goddess. But that ultimately reduced women to commodities, to sexual objects, to bodies controlled by religious institutions. The legacy of Babylon's sacred prostitutes is complicated. They appear in literature, in art, in religious debates. Early Christian writers used sacred prostitution as evidence of pagan corruption. Medieval Christians pointed to Babylon's prostitutes as symbols of spiritual fornication. Even today, Whore of Babylon remains a powerful religious metaphor, originally referring to Rome but drawing on these ancient Mesopotamian practices. Modern scholars debate whether to call them prostitutes at all. Some prefer sacred women, or temple servants, or devotees of Ishtar. Others argue that avoiding the term prostitute whitewashes what actually happened. These were women who exchanged sex for payment. That money went to temples. Whether we call it prostitution, sacred sexuality, or religious service, the reality was the same. Women's bodies were used sexually for institutional profit. What does this tell us about ancient religion? About power? About how societies construct narratives to justify exploitation. The Babylonians didn't see this as abuse. They saw it as sacred. as necessary, as pleasing to the goddess. The women themselves may have believed they were performing holy work. Religion provides powerful justification for practices that, viewed from outside, appear exploitative or abusive. Gilles de Rais believed he was summoning demons, justified child murder as a cult practice. The Inquisition believed burning heretics saved souls, justified torture as spiritual correction, and Babylon believed sacred prostitution honored Ishtar, justified sexual exploitation as religious duty. Throughout history, religion has been used to sanctify the profane, to make the unacceptable acceptable, to transform abuse into sacrament. The sacred prostitutes of Babylon, born into a world where goddesses ruled the heavens, where temples controlled cities, where religion and state were inseparable, dedicated to Ishtar from childhood, trained in music, dance, cosmetics, and sex, spent their lives in temple chambers, serving men in the name of the goddess, called holy, called blessed, called sacred women, but functionally enslaved by religion, controlled by priests, used by men, and forgotten by history except as curiosities, as shocking ancient practices, as evidence of how different the past really was. In the end, we'll never know what these women thought, what they felt, whether they believed in Ishtar's blessing, whether they found meaning in their service, whether they resented their fate. The texts don't tell us. We have hymns praising the goddess. We have temple accounts listing payments. We have laws regulating their status, but we don't have their voices, their stories, their truth. That's the tragedy of history. The powerless leave few records. The enslaved write no chronicles. The women used by systems leave no testimony. We can only piece together their lives from what others wrote about them, from the structures that controlled them, from the institutions that profited from them. And what we find is this: a 3,000-year system of sexual exploitation, sanctified by religion, enriching temples, controlled by priests, and experienced by thousands of women whose names and stories are lost forever. That's the story of the sacred prostitutes of Babylon, temple servants, holy women, devotees of Ishtar, and victims of a religious system that used their bodies for profit while calling it sacred, documented in clay tablets, recorded by Herodotus, regulated by Hammurabi's laws. A true story from ancient Mesopotamia that remains disturbing 2,500 years later. See you next time on Historian Diary.